Good evening. I'm Lady Nopeingham, and welcome to tonight's episode. All of tonight's stories were written by the same very talented Reddit user, BlackCat1206. I absolutely love the historical setting of these stories, so I hope you will too. If you enjoy tonight's narrations, please be sure to like and subscribe, and check out BlackCat1206's account over on Reddit, as he has more great stories over there. And now, without further ado, let's get into the stories. The Curse of the Pink Skull, Captain Delaney's Fate. Have you heard the tale of Jet Delaney and his fearsome pirate ship, the Black Sun? It is not a tale to tell with a light heart, for it is a tale of love, passion, desire, greed, betrayal, and an age-old death curse, which is still remembered by the ancestors of the unfortunate parties involved hundreds of years after the curse was cast. Indeed, there are even some unlucky souls who, it is said, have witnessed with their own eyes the doomed and deathly Black Sun, and have been driven to insanity because of it. Not much is known of the early years of Gabriel Jet Delaney. However, we can estimate, for the sake of our tale, at the time our adventure begins in the year 1719, our dubious hero himself was 35 years. The rumor that had traveled throughout the land goes like this. He was the illegitimate only son of a handsome but reckless and disinherited French nobleman, and a beautiful, wild, free-spirited French gypsy woman. However, as Jet Delaney had both his father's pugilistic attitude and his mother's quick, hot temper, no one was ever brave or stupid enough to raise the circumstances of his parentage to his face. Now the legend of Captain Jet Delaney and the ferocious crew of the notorious Black Sun was well known by all good citizens of the land, and the sight of the ship's bright crimson flag with its bold black sun and 2 gold cutlasses crossed over it put the fear of God into anyone. The saga of the ill-fated crew was used as a cautionary tale to keep generations of children from seafaring families on the straight and narrow. "If you're not careful, you'll end up like Jet Blackheart Delaney," mothers would say to their wayward sons. His ship sailed the seas until she came upon Abra Bay in the port of Bilbao, where there lived the beautiful and graceful Condessa Rosalina Casa del Mar, along with her husband, the handsome, noble, and very wealthy Conde Sebastian Casa del Mar. Captain Delaney caught the fair Condessa's eye, and she was very much taken with his sense of adventure, dashing charm, and elegance and aura of danger. And soon after the pair embarked on a liaison as deep, wild, and torrid as the waters that had carried him to her. Another of Rosalina's passions was that of collecting rare and beautiful jewelry, and her most prized possession, and the oldest, passed down from grandmother to granddaughter for generations upon generations, was La Calavera Rosa. The pink skull was an exquisite brooch fashioned from a pure piece of rose quartz native only to that area of Spain at the time. It was carved into a skull, and it was only off her breast when she retired to her bedchamber. On many stolen, not-so-secret moments of illicit love which they had both shared together, Captain Delaney had been drawn to its pure, simple beauty, illuminated further by the beauty of its wearer. And from the first time our jaded hero saw La Calavera Rosa, he had started to make plans to relieve his alluring, exotic lover of her burden. So he did. Like a thief in the night he came, stole kisses, love, along with the priceless pink skull, as well as the lady's impeccable reputation and virtue, and was off on the high seas again before you could even blink, leaving a noble union in tatters and the poor forsaken Condessa heartbroken and enraged, the fire of passion replaced with the desire for revenge. You could be forgiven for thinking that this is the end of the story. Captain Jet Delaney did, and he continued on his wicked way, alongside his motley crew, as he always had. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Captain Delaney had not known his lover as well as he thought. He could never have known about the ancestry of his pretty and vibrant Condessa, a long line of enchantresses and spellweavers and curse-casters. So, on a stormy, wild night, Condessa Casa del Mar stood on the shore of Abra Bay, and raising her eyes towards the heavens, she spoke mysterious, taboo words to the ancients. Let the black sun sail the seas for all time, her crew doomed to an eternity of dark, lonely voyages, unable to sleep, unable to eat or drink, unable to die, and the treacherous maggot Captain Jet Delaney will be damned to Hades. From that day forward, the Black Sun was a cursed ship, and the scourge of the healthy, wholesome, and good. The fair Condessa's terrible, vengeful curse resulted in transforming the entire crew of the Black Sun into diseased, flesh-eating ghouls who preyed upon any unfortunate human who happened their way. As for Captain Jet Blackheart Delaney, he came off the worst from the curse, hardly surprisingly. His strong, fine figure and dashing good looks were corrupted immediately, and the once terror of the Mediterranean seas soon gave his nefarious title a whole new horrifying meaning, becoming a decaying, crumbling, walking cadaver, with the stink of the grave upon him, and pus-filled sores covering his whole poisoned body, spreading death and destruction in his wake. Nowhere that the Black Sun set down her anchor escaped its dreadful fate, and many ports and towns were wholly obliterated by the cursed ship's unwelcome visits. That is the fate of the Black Sun, her crew, and their infamous Captain Jet Delaney. Witch's Willow. This is a fictional tale inspired by, but not about, my own family's beliefs and roots from generations back. Once upon a time, long ago, there lived a young woman in a small village, the region of where exactly is long forgotten, but the name was Willow Way. Willow Way was the home of 150 souls, and was a very proper, clean, tidy, upstanding little village, whose people were wholesome, law-abiding citizens who went to church every Sunday and were always ready to help anyone. The young woman's name was Bessie Martin, and she was what the villagers called a child of nature. They were all very wary and suspicious of her, which surprised and quite upset Bessie, as she did not think there was anything outlandish or odd about her lifestyle or her habits. After all, she merely prepared and brewed natural remedies to treat and cure minor ailments using herbs, flowers, and plants, and baked bread and other baked goods to earn a modest, decent living, as her grandmother did before her. When Bessie was 3, her mother died from a lung disease, so Bessie went to live with her grandmother, and as she got older, helped with her grandmother's tiny home bakery business. Bessie grew up to be a good, true, honest girl, who was as beautiful as she was kind, and by the time her grandmother passed away when Bessie was 21, she had quite a lot of admirers. The mayor of Willow Way had a handsome young son who, at the time of this story, was 25. His name was Roderick. He was very tall, strong, and with a group of his friends liked nothing more than to go out and about the area, spending their money, drinking and fighting with the local youths of the community. Nothing ever happened to Roderick or his friends. Money can pay off injuries and damages and buy freedom. Roderick had a long-term understanding. He was betrothed to the village squire's lovely daughter May. She was pretty, 18, and educated in the ways of a lady of high status. Now, the story told is that one day, when Bessie Martin was by the stream, she had been spending a much-deserved morning off from baking to enjoy the warm spring sunshine, and after paddling her small, dainty feet in the cool, calming water, she decided to rest up against the big old willow tree. Suddenly, she saw Roderick, or Roderick saw her. Roderick was taken by her assured confidence, her wild yet gentle beauty, and her pure, kind soul, which was one thing that his betrothed May did not possess. For Bessie's part, she was intrigued by him, in his boisterous and wayward behavior, fascinated by his entire presence, and flattered by his attention to her femininity. What happened next does not need to be mentioned, it can be imagined. Needless to say, it began with, "Hello, fair maiden," promises spoken that could not be kept, not even by the most honorable of men, and we know Roderick was not at all honorable. It finished with a heavy, swollen belly and bitter tears of loneliness. Roderick and May were married in the autumn after Roderick's secret liaison with Bessie ended so bitterly, and the heated longing he had once felt for his bonny wildflower soon cooled and faded altogether, to be replaced by the constant, adoring love for his fresh young bride. A year passed. Bessie had her child, a fair and delicate infant that she named Lily, in the same little cottage that she grew up in, and for many months Bessie and her baby lived a happy, peaceful, carefree life. Roderick's decaying, blue, bloated body was discovered by the stream he first saw and started to woo Bessie Martin. The cause of his too early demise was unclear, but soon uncomfortable and ugly whispers began to ripple through the small, close-knit, highly religious community of Willow Way. The whispers suggested that Roderick's death was not a natural one, nor not quite murder either. The whispers, insidious and filled with untamed spite, spoke of taboo and unholy acts committed by godless and wanton creatures. One creature, in particular, was the subject of these unfounded suspicions. These suspicions were not new, merely old ones given more fuel by fresh and undeniable evidence of wrongdoing. The whispers were of Bessie Martin, and the source of the whispers, perhaps quite understandably, May. The first thing Bessie knew of the angry mob was when they used brute force to break down the little wooden door and drag Bessie out of her meager bed by her hair. Another member of the mob plucked the terrified babe, Lily, from the cozy warm cot and followed the leader out of the small dwelling, where he, the mayor of the good, upstanding Willow Way, in turn put his lighted torch to the modest cottage. The kindling blazed throughout the deep, dark night. The vengeful mob brought Bessie Martin to her beloved Willow. They strung her up to the tree by her neck. They watched until the last flicker of life left her twitching, tortured body. When the corpse of Bessie Martin swung limply to and fro, the mayor of Willow Way coldly placed the fragile infant Lily into the hollow of the willow, turned away, and commanded the mob to leave. Before she relinquished her precious life to the pitiful wails of her cherished child, she looked over upon the still, tranquil stream where her lost love had made so many breakable promises to her, and in turn had paid for his indiscretions in a watery grave. Cold, steely hatred of everything and everyone who had ever forsaken her and her innocent Lily filled up her eyes, replacing the tears of sorrow, and with it came the hex. The hex was as dark as the night around her. It had formed as she had succumbed. Bessie Martin was 23 when she died. Lily Martin was 8 months when she died. A month after the fateful night, a youth from a neighboring village came forward to confess that he was present on the day that Roderick died. They had fought, and Roderick lost his footing and fell, banging his head against a rock on the bank of the stream. Roderick had fallen into the water. The youth, fearful that he would be accused of murder, panicked and fled. However, his conscience laid heavy on him, and he soon felt obliged to come forward and tell his tale. Nothing happened. The angry mob had already exacted their gruesome and terrible revenge after acting as judge, jury, and executioner. A few weeks after the unfortunate youth's confession, the mayor of Willow Way was found dead near the willow. The village chirurgeon of the yet unknowingly damned little village found the death was caused by a bullet to the heart, probably a lethal hunting accident. although no other living person was found near the area, and the bullet indeed came from the mayor's own gun. A few months after the mayor's death, May, the newly bereft young widow of Roderick, was found by the housemaid face down in the stream. Talk was that she had been a shadow of her former self since her husband's untimely passing, and unable to fend off the dark, sinister shadow of grief, had chosen to join her groom. Others believed that a more ominous, supernatural hand had guided and overseen the two sad tragedies. They kept their notions to themselves. It is said that the small village of Willow Way and the immediate area around it was soon after abandoned to nature herself, and, left to its own devices, it became dilapidated, and an odd sensation of dread and fear soon rose up all around it. The area soon evolved into a place of shadow and darkness, of boogeymen and childhood nightmares. All that is left of Willow Way now is the legend of the Witch's Willow. If you find yourself in the area, maybe you will wander upon Bessie Martin's cottage, or where it once stood. People say that it is still possible to see a circle of burnt, charred ground where she and her baby once lived in their humble little dwelling. Nothing grows there. No bright, colorful wildflowers, no plants or shrubs either, or sounds of beast or bird. The stream, which was once clear as glass, and flowed as free as Bessie Martin's own spirit, is now sluggish, still as the grave it was, dark, oily black and slimy with algae. Sometimes a cry of an infant has been heard around the looming, ancient, twisted willow, where an age ago a young, beautiful, carefree girl sat enjoying the warm spring sun, and where a year and a half later she and her baby girl lost their lives in the name of misdirected anger and prejudice. A person needs to take care to not go too close to the slippery bank and the long, tangled weeds that straggle up from the murky depth of the stagnant stream to lay listlessly against the bank, in case they miraculously entwine themselves around curious, exploring feet and drag them down beneath the surface of the cursed water. Green hair. This is an incident that happened to my family when we were young. We came from a family of healers and sensitives with Irish and Spanish heritage, so we have had paranormal and supernatural experiences all of our lives. This was just one more unexplained, slightly creepy event that I remember. The more interesting part, true or made up, is the old wives' tale behind the event. We were about 8 or 9 the day Mum took Elle and I over the heath. It was a hot and bright day in the middle of the summer holidays. We had been collecting natural materials to make a collage when we got home, and Mum's rucksack was full of stray feathers, wild grasses, leaves, and twigs, and we were on our way home where Gran was making a cheese flan and salad for dinner. As we were all very hot and slightly tired, Mom had decided that we would wade through the river instead of going back over the hills the way we had come. The thought of pushing my tiny wheelchair through the muddy-bottomed, weed-tangled river never seemed to faze my mom. She was a healthy, fit 26-year-old and knew the heath like the back of her hand. The river wasn't very deep at that part, so Mom tipped my wheelchair back, told Elle to hold on to the handle, and we went in. The water immediately soaked our clothes through, and Elle and I started to scream, giggle, and splash each other in sheer delight. Then we saw them. Weeds? Flowing with the current of the river, swaying back and forth like a woman's long, tangled, unkempt hair, and I got the distinct impression that what we saw could have been either thing. I glanced at Elle and instantly knew that she was having the same uncanny notion. The weeds started to curl around our legs and the wheels of my wheelchair, making our progress a little more laborious, and our previous screams of playful fun changed to moans and squeals of unease and disgust as we felt the weeds gently tugging at our legs. At no point did Mom ever look anxious or fazed by this experience. She just kept saying, It's only water weeds, you two. Come on, don't be silly. You've seen them loads of times. We finally reached the other side of the river, and as Mum dragged my wheelchair backwards up the riverbank, Elle climbed up it and sat down beside me. We both just stared silently at the river and the sea of green for what felt like the longest time, but in actual fact was only 10 minutes, before walking the rest of the way home. That night, after a hot bubble bath and cheese flan salad, in our flannel pajamas and slipper socks, around the fire drinking hot tea, we told Gran about our adventure. Our Gran took a sip of tea from her mug and told us the story of Green Hair. She had been a real person, though her real name had been forgotten by Gran, conveniently, Elle and I thought. Anyway, she had lived in the village around 1912, before the area was built up and modernized and developed into what it has become. She was young and kind, with a pretty face and beautiful long blonde hair, a daughter of a gentleman farmer, and was deeply in love with a handsome young soldier. They were to get married, but before they could, the Great War broke out and her young man was called up to fight. He was killed by a hand grenade on the front line, and when she found out that she was widowed before she'd even become a wife, she lost the will to live, and driven by grief-stricken insanity, she went to the same river that we waded through, and she threw herself in. The river was as wild as the land at that time, and by the time her body was discovered, it was blue, bloated, and half-eaten by fish. Her long, corn-colored hair had become interwoven with the slimy algae and long strands of evil-smelling river weeds, which clogged and choked the bed of the river. In fact, the pathologist who performed the post-mortem said that the body may have been found sooner if not for the dark green weeds that appeared to have curled around her limbs and torso, anchoring her corpse to the riverbed for days. From that time onwards, it was said that the river was haunted, cursed, or both. Anyway, an extremely bad place. People claimed to see the spirit of the young woman kneeling beside the river and weeping bitterly. More commonly, people often saw the body of the girl floating on top of the water, with long green hair/weeds streaming out behind her, and so she was given the name of Green Hair. Elle and I asked Gran why we hadn't heard this story before. Gran just smiled and said because it was an age ago, even before she herself was born. The area was developed and built up, and the river was tidied up and reconstructed, and along with it the tragic tale of Green Hair was lost in the stream of passing time. We didn't altogether believe Gran's morbid tale, but when Elle and I talked about it in bed that night, neither of us could dismiss the eerie feeling that we saw green hair flowing in the river that day. The Old Waterhouse. Over the heath, there was an ancient, crumbling waterhouse where the entire estate's water system was managed. Believe me, we thought it was a miracle how anything that old and manky could keep and pump out any water, but it did. It was made with bricks, with a black slate roof and iron doors, although at the time of this incident it was just a shadow of its former self, and didn't have any doors. The windows were all smashed in by generations of kids throwing rocks and stones at them. It was there when my mama and her siblings were kids and played over the heath, and they all told us that it spooked them and their mates as it did us. It was a really hot day one summer in the school holidays. The older boys were at home for some reason, and all the younger cousins, me included, were being little brats, so the boys said they would take us all blackberry picking to keep us quiet. Mama agreed gratefully. The boys were really responsible and mature at 16, 17, and 18. They babysat us younger kids all the time, so we all knew the rules of staying close to them and doing what they told us to do. A half hour later, everyone had their fruit buckets and we were off. There were 5 younger kids. We were all really excited as blackberry picking was a great family favorite activity, and our Gran's blackberry pies were the best. Gran's house led directly onto the back of the heath. There was a fence with a gap at the end. one of the older cousins passed me through to the other and lifted my tiny wheelchair over the fence. The other kids were through in seconds, and we were away again. On our way to our destination, the older boys told us spooky stories, as they always did, half because they liked scaring us, and half because we all used to beg them to. There was nothing more terrifying than a story from my cousins H or B. They were masters and so believable, and we loved it. We all stopped talking when we came to the waterhouse. Nobody ever dared to speak around or near the waterhouse, not even the older boys. For something so mundane, it always looked, and still does, so eerie. There was a second fence to get through before we reached our beloved blackberry field. This time, as we squeezed through the gap of the fence, we were all more somber as we remembered the old wives' tale, or urban legend that we all knew about the waterhouse. The story goes, once in the early 1960s, there was a gang of bank robbers. They were local to the area and were really nasty pieces of work. Their expertise was terrorizing bank customers and staff alike before grabbing and shooting anything that moved. They did several jobs without getting caught, but they really messed up a particular job, and a sweet 19-year-old trainee bank clerk was shot dead and 5 more people were seriously injured. One of the gang was also shot dead, along with the nastiest member of the gang being seriously wounded in the crossfire. It is said that the remaining gang members escaped with just a few hundred and made their way over to the heath and hid out in the waterhouse. It was newish at that time and was a perfect hideaway for the murderers. There was a lot of contention and stress between the remaining gang members, and although it was never proven how, the bodies of all 3 of the remaining gang members were discovered rotting away in the waterhouse 6 months later. A few years after, the weird stuff and creepy noises started occurring near and around the waterhouse. Mysterious, hairy figures were glimpsed moving stealthily among the pipes and wires. A dank, moldy, rotten smell, like aging river weeds, was always smelt around the area of the waterhouse, and eerie wails and menacing murmurs could be heard day and night. In the late 70s, there was a spate of mysterious deaths of homeless people who would shelter over the heath not far from the waterhouse. There was nothing to ever link the deaths to the waterhouse, but the locals soon started giving the waterhouse and surrounding area a wide berth because of the creepy history and dark reputation, and that left the waterhouse abandoned and in disrepair. That's what we knew of the waterhouse's dark history. That is why we were so wary and anxious to get away from it as quickly as possible. When we were all through the gap in the fence further away from the waterhouse, us younger cousins built up enough courage to glance over at the building of ill repute, before being rounded up by the older boys. A put me in my wheelchair again, and we set off to the blackberry field. We soon arrived at the field, where some other local kids we knew were already there, and we spent a nice afternoon picking and eating the juicy, sweet blackberries and splashing in the river. Soon the sun was getting low, and it was time for home. Our journey home was much like the one there. We were still bantering, laughing, and the older boys were still winding us up slightly, but being as it was getting later, we were feeling wearier and slightly subdued. When we reached the fence before the waterhouse, the air felt slightly too close, like before a thunderstorm. The youngest of the 3 older boys got me out of my wheelchair so that B could lift it over the fence. The other kids were already on the other side of the fence with H and B. A suddenly said to his brother in a low, guarded voice, "Something moved at the back of there, bruv." B just looked at him sideways. Out of the boys, A was the most likely to pull a stunt or wind anyone up for a laugh. But A was straight-faced. A said, "I'm going to have a look," passing me through to B and squeezing past us all. Having put me in my wheelchair, B had moved forward towards his brother. Suddenly, we all heard A shriek out in horror and disgust, and the 2 boys moved back quickly. H, having already taken me out of my wheelchair again, had told everyone to run, and we did. B, picking up my tiny wheelchair, folded it up while running. A grabbing the other two kids' hands and following B and H, running with me on his shoulders, holding my other cousin's hand. We ran and ran. A kept saying, "Don't look back, don't look back." I did, but saw nothing. We didn't stop till we got to the fence which leads back to the road on the estate, and we could actually see civilization again. We were all completely exhausted, especially the older boys. Before we slipped through the fence to the road, B, holding himself up by the railings, asked, "What did you see, A?" Yellow eyes, a hairy face." All us younger kids began to panic and scream, and H had to calm us all down. He said that we were safe and it would be all right, but we all wanted to get as far away from the water house as possible. When we got home, we all looked bedraggled and slightly nervy. Mama and my auntie noticed this and asked what was wrong. H just said that we got spooked by an old drunk man in the bushes looking for golf balls to sell, and as that was quite commonplace over the heath, Mama and my auntie just gave us kids a pep talk and hugged us. We never did tell my Mama or my auntie the truth about the yellow eyes and the hairy face, or find out what it actually was, but us kids didn't go near the water house for a long time after.